Okay, I'm going to call the meeting of the Corporate Services Committee to order. This is the 21st meeting of CSC. I'll start by reading a statement. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing and advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. I'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest from the committee. Okay, seeing none, we have 6 consent items. Would anybody like to deal with any of those separately? I just think a colleague's looking to look at the list to make sure that we don't want any of them dealt with separately. So just one sec. Okay, I just have a request for comments, which we can do. I heard the mayor say he was willing to move the whole slate, which is 2.1 through to 2.6. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Van Meerbergen. Comments or questions on the consent items? Councillor Kaibaga.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I just had a question for staff on item 2.2, which is the recognition event for Black History Month. I noticed that it's been referred back to the next, when we bring in the item of a proclamation. I just wanted to know if staff have any idea of when that will be. Will not be coming back to council, as we are now moving into November, and the Black History Month is quickly approaching. So I just wanted to know where we're at that, and if we're going to be able to meet the February mark.
Timing on bringing that back. Mr. Card, you look like you're going to answer.
I am, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I have a meeting arranged with the clerk for tomorrow, actually. That meeting time was chosen a couple of weeks ago, but because of the history of our proclamation policy, I had asked the clerk to remove from the archives relevant documents so that we could discuss them. So I'm not sure what's in the package. I'm going to see it tomorrow, and then I'll know how soon we can come back with a report concerning the proclamation policy. But I do have some familiarity with it. It is a very complex matter. It stemmed from proceedings before the Human Rights Tribunal. And I think it's a very delicate matter that will require some thought before we do a report. So
just as a follow-up, would you be, you will have seen this by council? You think you'll have an opportunity to provide us with an update maybe when this particular agenda item lands at council next week?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would certainly do that.
Councillor Kaibaga.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, again. I'd like to ask staff if there's any other way of moving forward with the plan without this proclamation, and also as we wait for the proclamation to come to be reported back on to the next council meeting, can we say that we're safe to have this moving and ready by February of 2020?
I don't know if that's Mr. Coxhead or Mr. Card on that one.
Thank you. I'll leave it to Mr. Card to respond to the timing when that's appropriate. It would be our intention to have it back as quickly as possible. With respect to the alternative, we've provided an alternative for consideration should a proclamation not either be decided on or in the alternative, should a proclamation be allowed, then that gets resolved. If it's not permissible, then we have an option for you to consider at that time.
Sorry, go ahead. If you have a question, you can.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, again, can you explain a little bit on this alternative?
Mr. Cox, any comments on the alternative option? Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Well, in that,
just if you could use your microphone, thank you.
There we are. Thank you very much. I think implicit or clear in the direction back to staff was, what I thought I heard was that they were going to do exactly that. And we could spend time today presuming outcomes when in fact that outcomes are what staff have been directed to do. So rather than having, rather than having part of an answer, I think it would be easier for us to understand the implications of the whole process. But I'm particularly interested in something very positive that the councillor said, which was, if it's not proclamation, I didn't hear that exactly, but if not, what are the things that we can do to support various events, be it Black History Month or any others? What are the opportunities that we have? And I also heard that Mr. Cox said Mr. Card will provide some information with respect to that. And frankly, I'd rather have that in that kind of detail all at once than pieces, because I think it's, I think it helps us understand as a council where the direction that we choose to take, acknowledging that proclamations were a pretty significant issue that got this council, prior council, into some fairly serious challenges. And I think that's something we are looking to avoid. So I really am interested in what in what this says, which is provide the information back to us with other options, and it might include proclamations, but whatever recommendation they do. I just don't want to presuppose it, Chair. And I think if we're looking for pieces and bits, that's why I'm not challenging the intent of the councillor. I'm just thinking that it may be more useful for all of us to get it in its entirety.
Councillor Kaibaga.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I'd like to thank the mayor for his thoughtful comments. I don't think that was a point of order. I think it was more of an opinion and idea that we could look at. I appreciate that. But I still want to know if what the plans are of staff in terms of, as again, I think when we were asking for this report to come back was to make sure that we do meet the February mark, as it is approaching, and it's the report specifically for Black History Month. And I just wanted to know that we're going to be able to meet that mark, and what are the other options that we're looking at. I do want to see a fuller plan come forward, but I would also like to hear, because they've been working on it for a while, I'd like to know what they've looked at.
Yeah, so we know that Mr. Card's going to have some updates on when he can review the proclamation policy. It won't be the review, but at council, he can give us an update once he's looked at the mystery package tomorrow. Mr. Cox, you said you had an alternative. Can you give just a really brief discussion on or comment on what that is so the councillor knows as we wait for Mr. Card's answer next week?
Thank you. With respect to the report that's before you, we have an option there, which is a delegation before council, not unlike the emancipation delegations that we received in the past, where an opportunity would be afforded for the Black History Month to come before council, share information with respect to Black history, and advise with respect to the activities of Black History Month. In the event that the policy matter hasn't been resolved by then, we would recommend that we do that at least this February.
Okay, that's the answer. Mr. Mayor.
One final thing to add to Mr. Coxhead's comments. At the start of every council meeting, colleagues will know that we have a recognition component, and we give considerable latitude for our colleagues to make any pronouncements that are appropriate as well. And whatever that might be it this particular issue or any other, colleagues and councillors have been very forthcoming in providing information, and that might well be another tool that might be considered to be used in addition to whatever else might well be in the toolbox.
Okay, thanks. So that's comments on one of the consent items. Anybody else have comments on any of the consent items? It's been moved and seconded. I don't see any, so we will open up the full slate of consent items for voting.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 5-0.
The next item on the agenda is an item for direction. This is a letter from the Parkinson's Society of Southwestern Ontario looking for an exemption and policy, well, it says exemption and policy amendment related to the using the use of Budweiser Gardens for an event they have, it's articulated in the letter. What I've done in advance of this is prepared a possible motion for colleagues to consider if they wanted to grant this request. If we don't, then it would be basically a note and file motion. There's no staff recommendation attached to it. It's simply a letter. So the committee will have to dispense in this in some way. I just wanted to provide that context for you, and I'll open it to colleagues for discussion and or motions. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Through your chair to staff, we know that Budweiser Gardens provides some 6 days for various community events. I believe I have that number right. Do we have any specific information with respect to the next year? I know that there's some talk about having this over a five-year consecutive period for their annual event. I'm just mindful of what's been committed and whether we have regular attendees that go beyond our policy agreement with Budweiser Gardens as far as is the dance card filled for 2020 on one-day events only?
Yes, the clerk is just noting from the other report where we approved Showdown in the Downtown, there's a line that says, given that 4 City of London days remain to be granted and there are no other pending requests for the use of City of London days at Budweiser Gardens, the Civic Administration recommends this request be approved. So it sounds to me like there's capacity given that statement. I will say, just as a correction to what I said before, the motion we have prepared is to make the exception but not amend the policy. So it would basically be granting this particular group this one-time exemption but not changing our normal process. So they'd have to come back in the future. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Well, through your chair, I don't think the principle of this is wrong, providing we have some understanding of the allocation. Are the 6 days typically used up? Are they typically, and again, I'm going to continue to use that word, typically requested by this time or by calendar year end? If we've got genuine charities that regularly use but have just not yet asked for the time, I'd feel somewhat discomforted in extending something when there's an expectation that others who from a timing standpoint just have not. So I'd look for some wisdom there through you, Chair.
Yes, and wisdom just arrived in the gallery. So I'll go to the city clerk to respond to that question.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the 2020 is not full as of yet. I believe the numbers for 2020 is contained in the first report on Budweiser Gardens, which I think is 2.6 for 2020. So we're not full as of yet, and it is 5 days a year.
I have Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Just to reassure the mayor, and I actually think we probably should change the policy because I can attest to the fact that we have dealt with many, many, many requests for, we'd like an exemption from the policy, we'd like to do our event again. And I mean, it's just a routine thing. I would say every year we deal with this kind of request, often from the Parkinson's Society, sometimes from other groups.
Mr. Mayor.
So the final question, which may or may not be the final question then, is that acknowledging that there are certain organizations that would have an annual interest in Bud Gardens for this purpose. The dance card may not be full yet, but would it be the expectation without this particular double day of would there be an anticipation of this being a full year, and are we letting anyone down because they just haven't booked early? And if we're not, my attitude toward this would be much more comfortable.
Great. I think the best we can do for that is based on previous experience. So maybe I'll have the clerk try to answer the mayor's question.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we generally do not have all 5 days asked for every year. So I'm just looking for direction as to whether you want the policy changed. I don't think it will be a problem. And as Deputy Mayor Helmer indicated, this is a common request every year from this organization.
So if colleagues would like, we can obviously adjust the prepared motion to provide direction for the clerk to report back on amending the policy as well as approving the request if someone would like to move that. Mr. Mayor.
Well, before we do that, I have no issue with doubling up from a single event to a double event. Even if this is multiple requests, I'm not sure I want to lock in one organization into this because there could be other organizations that at different times may request that are not on this list, and so if the motion was to have a 2-day event as locked in, I'd have some concern about that. I can get my head around it a bit more if it's for a limited period, I suppose, and if we're not at capacity. I'm just mindful of others wanting to come in and we say, sorry, the inn is full. That's, and if I'm worrying too much about nothing, then I'll stop, but, and it just committing a double day as an ongoing, I know they've asked for 5 consecutive years, but is that reasonable? I'm not sure.
So to assist in some differences of opinion, I think on the second part, which is the policy adjustment, we can certainly, the colleagues can put a motion on the floor to do both. We can vote on them separately, and we can make a decision on both this exemption as well as the direction to report back on the policy. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
So first of all, I would like to say that I don't think this is anything we need to be particularly worried about. I think things are fine and nobody's being put out, and I think we can make a slight adjustment to the policy and we will reduce the workload of our committee and simplify things. So I think that's good. The policy now is no more than 2 in a 5-year period. So that's what they're trying an exemption from, is they want to have more than 2 days over 5 years. So not 2 days in a row. They still want to have a 1-day event. They just want to do it year after year after year, and that's the thing that they can't do with the policy the way it is now. So I think if we leave it as a general review, the clerk is quite familiar with all of the requests that have come in over the years. I think this is the one that is proving to be a bit of a barrier. And I think once we have the point where everything is totally subscribed and we're maxing the 5 days, then we can look at putting limits in. But right now they're not all being utilized and we have limits on it anyway, which is why we keep having these discussions. So I think we can probably have a review as long as we're not prescriptive about it. I think the clerk will give us good advice on how to change it.
Mr. Mayor.
This might sound a bit backward, but perhaps it gets clarified if we can see the proposed motion, and then there may well be someone that puts it forward.
Well, I will ask the Deputy Mayor if he'd like to put that motion forward, and then we can get it on the screen.
Sure. So I'm willing to support the exemption for the Parkinson Society and also a review of the policy by the clerk's office with a report back to our committee.
We will get some language on the screen. People can review it, and then I will ask for a seconder. Okay, if you hit current item, you should be able to see the language in the motion. And I would look for, after colleagues review that, for a seconder. Mr. Mayor? The Mayor is willing to second. So moved and seconded. I'll just give a chance for everybody to read it and then let me know if you'd like to comment. Has everybody had a chance to review it? Would anybody like to speak to it? Okay, we'll open that move by Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Mayor Holder, to basically provide the exemption and direct the clerk to report back to the Corporate Services Committee with potential policy amendments that will allow for flexibility related to these requests. Okay, we'll open that for voting.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 5-0.
Any deferred matters or additional business? Seeing none, we have 3 in-camera items. I'll look for a motion to go into confidential session. Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Van Meerbergen. We will do that on the screen. And we have no other items on the agenda after that, so we will move into public and adjourn from the committee room after this vote. So.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 5-0.